Okay, so it's about 7:01. So let's get underway. We've got the presentation up on screen, so I can't see the panelists, but that's okay. I'm taking a look. Right now, there are, I know I get this question during these open houses sometimes, there's 21 people here who are not part of the development team. And we're here to take a look, obviously, at the 979 Wellington Street West. I have expressed to the developer that the proposal is problematic. We have a brand new secondary plan that doesn't contemplate this kind of height at this location, and there are also a number of traffic issues. But tonight is your opportunity to pose the questions. I just want to see, do we have, and I apologize, Fiona. No. Oh, we have Simon Diaco. So Simon Diaco is the Ottawa City Planner who is on the file. So he is here to listen to your feedback this evening. It will be his job to listen to the back and forth over the course of the next several months and ultimately make a recommendation to council as to whether or not to approve this development. So if you have questions about the process, please feel free, but I don't ask the planners to address anything substantive at these meetings. They are here to listen to the feedback. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fiona, who will be running the meeting. From here, she'll do the housekeeping and then introduce the applicants on this one.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. There's been a lot of these recently, so every time you show up, we super appreciate it. So the way it's going to work, if you haven't attended one of these open house webinars before, very shortly, the applicant will move through a high-level presentation. You can see the PDFs are already displayed. They'll introduce their team as well, and then we'll move into a Q&A. So the way you can communicate with us tonight is through the Q&A button. If you put your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you should see 3 buttons, one of which is the Q&A, and that's the only one you'll need to use tonight. So if you want to ask us a question, you type it in there. All the questions come up, and then I will approve them. So here's a test question right now. I've clicked answer live, and hopefully you should see that show up. I would read the question out loud, a panelist will answer it, and then I'll click done, and it'll move into the answered area. We also have the option of typing answers. So in case there's just something that maybe it's already been asked, or if it's a very specific or nuanced thing, we might type an answer. So I've done that just now for another test question. Hopefully you can see that. As I moderate the questions, I am going to try to avoid repeated questions as much as possible. And I am going to pay attention to who's submitting the questions and make sure that everyone's getting a chance to ask questions. So if you type 3 questions in a row, don't be offended if I just grab your first one and get to the other ones perhaps later on. We'll go, this is scheduled tentatively until 9 o'clock. If the questions finish earlier, then we'll wrap up earlier. And if we get to 9 o'clock and you feel as though your question hasn't been answered, please feel free to email us that question, and we'll absolutely make sure we get your information. But in general, you want to be following up this open house with submitting comments to the lead planner as well as to our office. So as Jeff mentioned, Simon Diaco is listening here tonight, but for your feedback to become official, it needs to be submitted to him via email, or also you could give him a call if you would like to. And we like to be privy to all the comments that are being submitted as well, just so Jeff has an idea what the sentiments are from the community. So I think that's it. There's one question. Someone's asking me if, can we get the panelists up, please? So right now we are sharing the slideshow presentation, and you have the option of how you want to view the panelists. You might have set it up so that you're seeing who's speaking, but you can change that so that you can view them in a grid. There are 10 panelists, so you wouldn't be able to see all of them at the same time, but you can scroll. And very shortly, Maureen's going to introduce her team. So you'll be introduced to all the panelists who are here today. The second question before we get started, will the slides be available after the meeting? I will let the team answer that, but I anticipate that most of this information will be available on DevApps. I don't believe this has been submitted yet. So once they submit the application and it's on circulation, you'll be able to access all of this information and much more as well. But I'll let them get into that as well. So I'm going to consider those two questions answered for the time being. And Maureen, I leave it to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Councillor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Maureen Flanagan from ML DevCo. We are the applicant and developer of the proposed project at 979 Wellington. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce my colleague, Peter Smale from ML DevCo as well, and the rest of our team. I have Rod Leahy of Rod Leahy Architects, Miguel and Kirsten from Fotin, Chris Gordon, our traffic consultant from CGH. We have Jim Moffat, our historical consultant, and I'm not sure if I've missed anyone in our team. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening. We look forward to having you have a look at our presentation and engaging in a meaningful discussion. Thanks so much.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Kirsten, as Maureen mentioned. So I work with Fotin. I'm a senior planner working on this file along with Miguel Tremblay. So I am going to actually turn off my video while I speak because I do find it actually very distracting. So I'm going to do a very brief overview just of the site context and policy context before I turn it over to Rod Leahy, who will introduce the design of the building and some more discussion on how the design got there. So as you know, so this is 979 Wellington Street West. It actually comprises 8 properties on that block, but we're, for ease of identification, calling it 979. So if you just move to the next slide, I think, one second. Rod, we'll move to the next slide. Sorry, Rod, can you move to the next slide, please?
Did move to the next slide.
Oh, it might just be a delay. Okay. Of course, technology doesn't always work the way we want it to. So everybody, I'm sure, in this neighborhood is very familiar with the site. So as we mentioned, it is the whole block. So bounded by Welling Street West on the south, Garland Street to the west, Armstrong Street to the north, and Hilda Street to the east. So this is a very brief overview shot. You can see the site. Right now, it's considered, from a planning perspective, underutilized and underdeveloped with some surface parking facing Wellington Street West. And you can see that in the next slide. So just wait for it to switch here. But as we're waiting for it to switch, we can see, along that traditional main street, along Wellington Street West, some low-rise development in the form of some commercial, everybody's familiar with the Suzy Q building. It's not currently there, but the former Suzy Q building, as well as some 2- and 3-story buildings along Wellington Street West and 2.5-story buildings along Armstrong on the north side. So if we move to the next slide, it's just some more shots of the street and the context. And, as we all know, an important consideration for this is that Wellington Street West dead ends at in front of this site, terminates there from a vehicular perspective, but of course, is open for pedestrians. So moving to the next slide. So just to, yeah, that's okay. As it's loading, this slide is just to provide some context from a transit perspective. So from a transit perspective, the site is conveniently located in very close proximity to Bayview Station to the northeast. It's approximately 360 meters. We'll see that load up in a second here. And also to the southeast of the site is the future Gladstone Station. So from a transit perspective, in looking at future development and context, it is kind of on the periphery, on the edge of the transit node from a site location, even though the actual 600 meters or 500 meters is actually much larger. So if we go to the next slide, and so an important consideration too is, Bayview Station is a critical location within the transit network as it does bring together the Confederation line and the Trillium line. So from a transit perspective, it's a key location. and within walking distance of this site. So also important for the site is the connectivity to the pedestrian network as well as the bicycle network. So Armstrong Street is a local route, which then connects to the pathway system along the river, as well as a spine route along Wellington Street and then further east to Somerset Street West. So along this frontage of the site provides an east-west connection, through to the downtown core and further west to Westboro, and up to the pathway system. So the next slide. So just from a policy perspective, the site is designated traditional Main Street. So the official plan acknowledges that sites, the traditional Main Street may extend deeper into the site. So from a policy perspective, we're considering this a traditional Main Street site. It is located within 2 secondary plans. So the frontage along Wellington Street West is within the Wellington West secondary plan. And then the Armstrong properties along the north on the rear side of the property are the Scott Street secondary plan. So the traditional Main Street does permit up to mid-rise buildings, so up to 9 stories. And as was mentioned, so we are seeking to go higher than 9 stories. So we're going to be applying for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment to increase the height, as well as a site plan control application after that process for the detailed design. So looking at, traditional Main Streets, the policy framework identifies them as intensification areas, especially within close proximity to transit. And is also looking to establish that street front and that lively environment and pedestrian environment through increased retail usage, supportive residential uses, access to transit, access to bicycle networks, etc. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide just gives an overview of the zoning. So most of the site is zoned for traditional Main Street, with the exception of the Armstrong Street properties, which are zoned for R4. So an R4 zone permits up to 4 stories. The TM zone, there is some site-specific zoning applicable to the site that was undertaken through a previous official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment process. So as I mentioned, though, the traditional Main Street does look at, from a policy perspective, 9 stories. The secondary plan identifies for, I believe it's 6 stories. So we are going through the official plan amendment process together with the zoning amendment. And of note too, just on the north side of Armstrong, 35 Armstrong, across the street from the site is Armstrong House, which is a designated heritage site. So through the process, we'll be discussing that and how that complements the development, and how the development complements that site and works with the development overall. So just going to the next slide. So I'm going to wrap up my part of the presentation. Another consideration for the development is, of course, the design guidelines, the city approved urban design guidelines. So this site is, within within close proximity to transit. So we have to consider the transit oriented development guidelines. Also want a traditional Main Street guideline. So we have to consider those guidelines, as well as a proposal for a high-rise building. So there's a lot of guiding design elements that we're reviewing and we've incorporated into the design. And I will then pass it on to Rod, who will talk about how all these policies and guidelines in this site context have lent themselves to the proposal that we're seeing today.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with a quick, just again, the site in context. Obviously, when we start the project, we began analyzing the site, and I thought it would be good to do a brief history of actually this site and this particular development, because it's evolved over the last year significantly. So when we were approached by the development group originally, they essentially had the lands that were subject to an earlier zoning amendment that allowed for a 9-story building along Garland Street. It was a narrow building that basically went from 9 stories stepping down to Armstrong Street, and it made up less than a quarter really of the block. And it was in this general area, and it went through an approval process, and our client bought this land, and as well as the adjacent property, and asked us to take a look at what we could do. And at that time, we designed a much lower building. It was a smaller piece of property, and we looked at a building that was basically a 12-story building, stepping down to the Armstrong, to our lower building on Armstrong Street. And we had actually at that point came in and had initial discussions with city, and actually met with ward councillor as well. And an interesting discussion took place about what were the potential opportunities in the site and what were some of the negatives of what we're doing. And so at the request of a number of individuals, they said, you know, if you could purchase the adjacent properties, maybe we could look at shifting the density off of Garland Street, which is a narrow street, and begin moving the density east toward, at this point, sort of mid-block. And so the development company then went and purchased the adjacent properties, and which allowed us to take a look at redevelopment now and try to bring in some of the issues that were raised by the councillor in terms of, there's a way that we could reduce the density on the west side of the site and maybe transfer that density toward more to the, at that point, the middle of the site. The other, so we, at that point, we came in and we came back and we had a building, I think we had a building in the range of 18 stories, but we had reduced the 13 stories or 12 stories in this area and basically moved it over to this area. And so we're looking at now a building that was 6 stories coming in from Garland to, and then stepping up to the 18 stories, essentially just transferring density over. Again, further discussion took place about the opportunities. Then we're beginning to, the ability to close down the site. And we looked at the opportunity to purchase a small property, a white building that exists on the site, as well as a property in behind, to really begin to cement the idea of more of a block building. And so again, we came back, we were able to secure those properties, and now we knew we could pretty well close off the entire street with the exception of the small area on the front that was associated with the building at the corner of Hilda and Wellington Street. We thought there was an opportunity just before we really start the process to one more try to look at purchasing the adjacent properties to enclose the entire site, which would do a number of things, and we'll walk you through the development opportunity. But one, it becomes, we begin to now look at the entire block, and so we have the ability to move density around in a much more sort of aggressive way to begin to really begin to look at sort of keeping as much of the policies of the traditional Main Street going, respond to what Armstrong could be. So this last change really allowed us to close off all of the Wellington Street. By securing all the property on Hilda Street, we could look at a different way to do traffic. Originally, we were going to be really forced into coming in off of Armstrong Street. Garland is just felt it was just too narrow to work in that corridor. We thought we'd come in off Armstrong Street. By securing the entire block, we were able now to look at coming in off Hilda Street. Hilda has got, as everybody knows, it's a two-way for part of the street, one way, so you can't actually from here move through. So, but you can from Armstrong move into it. So it allowed us to change the whole nature of the traffic movement in the area. And then Chris Gordon will speak to this, but there are some real benefits by taking advantage of the way the street network works to limit the amount of sort of traffic movement through the site. The other, of course, major function by securing the entire Wellington Street, we now have opportunity to take this land, working with the Parks Department, working with the City of Ottawa, to be able to turn this into a much larger area. And we'll come back to this because I think this is a very important part for the concept of creating something interesting at this particular node. You know, this is such an important node within the context of the city. I say I'm a West Ender. I've grown up my entire life in the West End, and every Sunday was coming here to Nate's for smoked meat, and it was just sort of Carter's, I should say. Anyways, and it was just such an important part of the community. And then the last part, which is significant, is we want to create Armstrong Street to really reflect the residential nature of the street. And we've introduced two-story townhouses along the entire frontage of Armstrong Street, which originally we only were able to do about 2/3 of the street because we had a parking garage entrance. And then this was adjacent property. Now we have all of the townhouses across, and those are key to the development because we can put in 3-bedroom townhouses here. That will allow families to sort of become part of the active streetscape. They have private front yards with direct access to the sidewalk. So I think it's a unique design opportunity, and I can begin to show our sort of concept drawings of that. So that's sort of a brief overview of the history. What we have come up with as a design concept that we are looking to move forward is essentially a 22-story building, which is in fact 16 stories sitting on top of a 6-story podium. And the 6-story podium has been designed to really wrap and respond to the traditional Main Street of the 6-story frontage along Main Street. And further to that, we stepped the building down to 4 stories at the very edge of the building. So really trying to pick up a strong sort of pedestrian relationship between the pedestrian and the building with a sort of 4-story framework for the building at grade. It's stepping up to 6 stories, a very large setback to the tower. And the 6-story wraps around again with the 4-story, again facing the street, 6 stories. As we move over to the Armstrong, it's in fact 4 stories, and it steps down to 3 stories at the street. So here's where you have these are the private yards of the townhouse units. And I say they're very preliminary in their nature, but the idea is to actually have some yard space at grade, direct access to the sidewalk, to their front door, and these units still could be attached into the actual workings of the building itself. All of the access to the underground parking, as stated, is off of Hilda Street. So we've now got basically 3 sides interrupted without, this can be all commercial across Wellington Street as well as Garland Avenue, and then all commercial, residential.
I'm not on camera.
We've brought, these are preliminary plans basically showing the parking layout, so and bike storage areas. So we have a very simple ramp straight in off of Garland Street, bringing you down into the lower level. We're parking at a ratio of 0.5 parking spaces per unit with a visitor of 0.1, which 0.6. So, and we're doing bicycle parking in excess of 1-to-1. And we're looking at alternate ways to actually increase that through the use of bicycle parking on top of the parking spaces against the exterior walls. So we're hoping to get that number up significantly to maybe 1.5 bicycle spaces per unit or higher. So these are very preliminary, but these are 2-story units across Armstrong Street. And we have a lobby area and commercial along in the commercial end of, say, amenity space along Wellington Street. I'm happy to say, I think I've been allowed to say that Suzy Q Donuts is actually very excited about coming back onto the site. We imagine they'll be located fairly close to the entrance to be able to sort of pick up a donut on the way to work. As the building moves up into the 2nd floor, you can see we've created a courtyard, and this is still an area that we're looking at for development and potential of where we locate amenity space, what sort of amenity space we'll be looking for. I think one of the things we're beginning to realize with what we're going through right now with COVID is, how important are the designs of the units. So we're rethinking units in terms of sizes. They're possibly moving up in size, making sure all the units have balconies. So we're beginning to take a look at everything about these mixed-use buildings and how they work and how they function, how you move people. So I say these are very preliminary at this point, but they give a bit of a feel. This is an internal courtyard that has, as you move up through the building, the courtyard basically will disappear. So you have essentially on the third floor, you've got units going all the way around this donut, and these are 6 units in here of use of this courtyard, and this is an open air courtyard. It's not an atrium. It's a size. We've recently just completed a building where we put a courtyard exactly the same size, open air, and it's actually quite a nice space. We are looking at potentially opening up this area, so maybe instead of on all 4 sides, it may open up to Armstrong Street. We're still starting design development. As you move to the 4th floor, you can see we set back here, so the building steps from 3 stories up to 4 stories. The 5th floor, the 4th floor is still continuous. At the 5th floor, it steps back on this point here, and so the 5th floor, this has a terrace that basically wraps around the building. So this terrace is above the 4th floor. So, and then we go to the 6th floor, and it's just this L-shaped leg. And then as we move up, the last bit is we move into the actual tower. So on the 7th floor, you have a roof terrace on top of the 6th floor, which is essentially this. So again, when we look at places for amenity space, we begin thinking, well, maybe amenity could be example. You could have a room here that would allow access to this very large roof deck. And the roof decks now can be used for a number of items. We're looking at different approaches, different buildings. We're putting in planters for vegetable gardens. These become real sort of community spaces and opportunities for creating real gathering places for the residents of the building. And the last is the tower as it reduces in the upper floors, and of course then there'd be a mechanical room on top. Preliminary design images, and these really are preliminary before we begin looking at sort of the fabric of the building, but it's just an idea on how we begin breaking up the massing and begin to look at the building. It's sort of we call this sort of a massing diagram with a little bit of detail just to give a sense of scale. So you can see by what we've accomplished from the original proposal, which was a much smaller building, we were essentially a building that was sort of like this, and then this was the existing. Then we increased it, and the tower came to like this. And the last was the last acquisition, the last piece of property. And I know economics aren't necessarily a part of the planning process, but you have to understand that these last 2 pieces of property were substantial costs associated with them, that people realized it was a really good idea to have them. Unfortunately, without moving from that 18 stories where we were, we really need to have at least some rationale on the valuating, bring some value to the acquisition of these 2 properties. These 2 properties, who made up less than 1/4 of the site, I mean, probably close to 1/6 of the site, were valued at a huge number. It didn't make any sense at all economically to pick up these properties, but I think the benefits really outweighed the financial aspect of it. So we moved forward, or my client moved forward with the acquisition, really on the basis, hoping that we could pick up some extra density, at least to begin to justify it. We have, didn't really come close to it, but you can see the idea of that we've really shifted the whole building from Garland Street to the east, to Hilda, which is an adjacent building itself, which can be considered a high-rise building, although it's only 10 or 11 stories. I think it's 11 stories. And again, on the north elevation on Armstrong, you can see this is our sort of beginnings of these imaging of what these two-story spaces can be here. These are the townhouse spaces along. So each of these two areas basically are two-story units. So again, we're just in the very beginnings of designing that. I think as we move through this zoning process, by the end, we'll be able to come back and show you the fine-grained detail of what we're proposing. You can see that we put significant setbacks from the tower to the street, some 5.5 meters back, as well as steps within the building itself. I'll move to, we did some quick sort of SketchUp models to begin really trying to show what we were trying to accomplish. And I think this upper left drawing shows you the idea of this, essentially what I was talking about, the 4-story reference line across the street, stepping back to the 6 stories at the back, and then stepping back to the tower. This portion of the tower is probably some, let's say 8 or 9 meters from the front face of the building. And again, the tower has been set back from Hilda as well. And you can see this sort of, the whole idea was to reinforce actually the traditional Main Street as it's stepping down. This is the old Salvation Army or Neighborhood Services site in the corner, the LCBO. Obviously, will be subject to some development in the future, but I think we've set that language up that it could very easily work in that 6-story language that's in the traditional Main Street. I think the policies on this site is significantly different than the policies that we're looking to our site as we move closer to transit and away from the center of the community. So this is a view looking east on Wellington toward the Wellington Street in its current sort of condition. And then this is, again, the views on looking south on Garland Street. Again, with the large step back here, the 6-story pushed back from the front and the 4-story and 3-story along the street. Oops, sorry. On the, sorry, this, just some more views to begin, try to really show what we're trying to do, and I think we've achieved it. This is a view on the upper left corner, sort of just further away, up high in the air, but you begin to see this idea of enclosing this land into the potential park area and what that park could be. And again, the separation, and again, this idea here on this stepping down at this point, but the potential for a 6-story building to come into here, and it just leads naturally down the street that way as the city evolves over time. This slide on the upper left side, Somerset Street view. So this, we've come over the bridge. We're probably at around Bayswater here at this point. We've drawn this just for the sake of ease. It's actually fairly flat. So we've come down to the sort of the more flatter area here. And this is where the whole idea, if you look at this, so you've got the buildings along Somerset Street, the tower portions pushed back and away from the street, and the 6-story running, setting up the language of the traditional Main Street as it works down the street. And again, this is just another view on Wellington Street, looking west along Wellington down the street. We've done some sort of very quick renderings, try to get a little bit more feeling of life in the space, but you can see the potential with this and the idea of all this park area and what it could be. And I think this is where we step back as architects, and I think we step back as, you know, planners, and begin to bring in parks people, bring in the community members, and sort of reimagine what this space could be, because I think it could be more than what it is. And I think this slide probably is best to show. So now we've just, I asked the rendering company, they only gave them a sort of day's work. The building really isn't designed yet. But I said, listen, just put something down to at least give a sense of scale of what we're actually talking about here. So we could have area that could be adjacent use to these commercial areas. They could have, if there's cafe, for example, Susie Q is in here, they could still out, have a little sitting area. But really, it's not that. It's really about creating something that's more dynamic. Fotan has put together some slides, but I mean, they made reference to Zibi, for example, where they've got a very dynamic use of furniture where they can be moved and pushed and not something that vandalized. These are just, you know, I think anyone who's been to New York, to the High Line, to see the different approaches to these small landscape areas with, you know, movable benches, movable tables, something that could be a plaza area. So I think there's great potential and could be reason for a lot of excitement and a reason, one of the reasons to support a project like that. And my last slide is really, again, Fotan put this together with some of the work they've been doing over on the Zibi, and the idea of, you know, what you can do with some of these small spaces and how they can be used and designed to reflect, you know, the fact we're a winter city, and how do we create things that work well in winter, spring, summer, and fall. So I think there's great potential here for something more so than just the small park. I know the little park works nicely, but I think this could be a little bit more dynamic, a little more interesting, and really could be a focal point of this end of Wellington Street. So I'm going to set up the next, I have one slide. It's really the least interesting, but, and it's really, you're going to have to take a look at it. This will eventually be on the dev apps, and if we do a shadow study to look at the impact of our proposal. I think one of the things that's interesting about this site is when you look at the adjacent properties and what's on the adjacent properties, and if we go back to that, or I go back to that, this plan here, and look at and what's here and the sort of uniqueness about this site. So of course you've got this to the south, you've got Wellington Street and the potential park area. You've across Hilda Street to the east, you've got a high-rise building, the surface parking area. To the south, you've got the Heritage Building and 2 large parking areas. And to the west, you've got basically land assembly of the old neighborhood services, LCBO. So although we're definitely part of the fabric of the community, we definitely are on the edge. And I think as Miguel walks you through the next series of slides, he'll begin to reinforce the idea that this is a unique site. I know it's sort of geographically sort of still within the community, but it really sits as a perimeter street. And then, sorry, the last slide of my presentation is just a preliminary site plan, and it really just has the statistics, but they are still in flux. This is a slow moving slide, just these trees. So they basically outline numbers of units. And basically at this point, we're showing a unit count and at 283 units. I would say that's the very largest count it would ever be. We'll probably start looking at reducing that with some combined units to create more family-oriented units. So we're still doing some detailing how this will work, but generally that's the way the project is working right now. And of course, we show the site plan from an existing condition, and we actually only own, obviously, we don't own the street. So we would be like to be involved with the development of the new parkland area, but our site plan at this point would be subject to the subject property with some form of a working agreement on how we move forward with the street development. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel.
Thanks, Rod. And I got to admit, I'm a little uncomfortable that Rod's going to be working my slides, but just
I'm doing a good job so far.
yeah, so far. So I just Rod had a pretty fulsome presentation, and I know there's questions, so I won't be overly detailed here, but and just you know, full disclosure, there's a fair amount of materials in this package, and some of that is really not just about this evening and the public meeting. So we've been working on this application for quite some time now to try to get our heads around the distribution of density and height on this site. And you know, the city is getting increasingly sophisticated at looking at these types of applications, where they, you know, we're dealing with staff. Obviously, the community consultation is a big part of that. And then there's also the city's urban design review panel. So that's a panel made of architects that provide us additional input on heights and context. So a lot of the images that I'm going to go through in a minute are they're really geared towards the city's UDRP to give them a really fulsome understanding of the area and how this building fits within that. And that's actually, it ends up being very useful and profitable for us as well to be able to share that now with the community. But I'll just touch on a few points. So this is actually quite an exciting site from an urban planner's perspective, because there's a lot of moving parts, and a planner's role is to provide input to the architect and the client in terms of the policy documents and how we marry up with those. In this case here, Kirsten gave you an overview that there's the Ottawa official plan, which is a governing document, a 5-year vision, 10-year vision, 25-year vision as to how the city will grow over time along certain strategic corridors and in areas in proximity to transit. And then you have more fine-grained documents, like the documents that she talked about with the Wellington West secondary plan. And we went through an exercise here to start assigning densities and heights based on those policy documents combined to see how this building fits and if we're on the right track. So you'll notice the yellow buildings are all buildings that are identified in those policy documents, but not subject to any development approvals or any applications, just the policy direction. So the one that you'll notice in closest proximity to the site is the triangle that's between Somerset and Wellington, and there's some policy direction there as to how that area will develop over time. We made the assumption that the area to the west of us along Wellington West, it may not experience a huge amount of development. There's already policy documents that don't accommodate for it, but at the same time, you're now starting to get a little bit further removed from transit, whereas the buildings in the horizon, so those 3 gray towers, those are Trinity's 900 Albert. So that's the city's tallest zone building. It's 65 stories, and then 35 and 45 story towers with them. And then the rest of the yellow or orange on the horizon there is the lands that are part of the Bayview Station District secondary plan. And to Rod's point earlier, you start to appreciate that this is where the Wellington Street, Main Street, starts to integrate and connect into that larger policy area and that area that's identified for greater heights and density. Next slide, maybe, Rod. Yeah, that's a good one. So we're obviously the one in the purple. The gray, you can see some other buildings now that have been populated a little bit. Those are the 2 Claridge Towers. And then further south, because south is going towards, yeah, so to the top of the page, those are the Trinity buildings that are proposed right now at Gladstone and Loretta. And everything to the other side of the rail corridor there, those are the Ottawa community housing lands that were recently, subject to an announcement in terms of funding. And then you have some additional lands that make up the rest of the Bayview Station CDP. the reason I find it's an interesting site from a planning perspective is you have the policy direction of the main street, which Rod spoke to, and a lot of it is about, at that level, that grain of policy documents, it's about how you fit into the main street. What do you do at the street level? How do you treat podiums and building heights to make sure that you're still making a comfortable contribution to that main street, that you're keeping a certain character. But as Kirsten pointed out, this site now is actually within 360 meters of transit, which it also makes it eligible and part of that broader discussion about how the city will start allocating density and heights, transitioning to the transit station. You can see the Bayview station on the bottom left-hand corner of the site in really close proximity to 900 Albert. You notice there's a hole in the donut. It's the Tom Brown Arena site. We chose for various reasons not to assign any height and density there, although it's owned by the city. A few reasons is we're well aware that the community is very attached to the open space and the arena function as a community amenity. But we're also of the opinion that as you start increasing density and proximity to these transit stations, the open space becomes that much more valuable in meeting community needs. So we recognize that it's a site that's in very close proximity to transit, but maybe has a different role because you're adding density to transit. Just stay on this slide, Rod, for a second, but you'll see in the far south corner, the Preston Street. So you'll see that's the Icon building there. And funny enough, the two buildings on the other side of the Icon are actually zoned for 55 stories. So they're not built yet. They're owned by Richcraft, but they're actually going to be taller than the Icon. And I find it's kind of an interesting comparison because much like Wellington Street West, which has lower profiles assigned in the secondary plan, so does Preston Street. So those buildings, which are some of the tallest buildings in the city, are actually on a traditional main street, but it's because they overlap, much like this site here, with the transit station and the proximity to the transit station. So the Icon is, maybe 160, 200 meters from that transit station. So it's a very similar policy context where you have to start looking at how close are we to transit, how well suited the site is to start to contribute to the city's expectations for density near transit, and then how well do you transition back into that main street. And Rod did it for a range of reasons, but I really like the notion that the tower is pushed to the east as much as possible on the site, because you recognize that the buildings further to the east at the transit station are where there's going to be a lot of height and density there. And it starts to, maybe just keep flipping through the images just so we go through them quickly, Rod. But
Miguel, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Can you wrap up in less than 5 minutes?
Much less than that. So
thank you.
So here you can again see how that notion of transition starts to occur. Yeah, there's some taller buildings further west, but I still think the majority of Wellington West Main Street will stay low profile. Keep going, Rod, and we'll just go through them really quickly. Again, very comparable images, but you can see where this building now starts to fit into a broader context, both in terms of policy and proposed built form. And then I think that might be it actually for,
that's a lot.
Yeah, these are just very similar, comparable images. And maybe just keep going one or two and we can leave it there until we're ready to talk more about
That's it. That's the last one.
Okay, so I'll just conclude there. And it's a site that, because of the land assembly, the proximity to the transit, the ability to still meet the objectives of the secondary plan in terms of how you deal with Wellington West and how you deal with the podium, for instance, to the rear of the property to transition well to Armstrong. It's a site that now warrants a rethink a little bit in terms of that secondary plan. And really the discussion is, are we doing a good job here of recognizing those principles, but also taking the opportunity to put density near transit? So I'll leave it to that, and I guess we can start with the questions, or I'll let Fiona guide us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Fiona.
Yep.
I just wanted to say it was my mistake earlier in my introductions. I introduced Jim Moffat as our heritage consultant. It was my mistake. I should have said he's with IBI. Here's our civil consultant. I apologize to Jim.
I've often been accused of being old, but not in the terms of heritage.
Apologies, Jim.
Okay, so I have 5 questions in the queue right now. I am amazingly surprised. I expected way more. So if you have a question, please do not be shy and put it into the Q&A. And so the first one's not a question, it's a comment, but I'll read it out loud. The Hintonburg Community Association will be considering this application when it is submitted and will be taking a position on it. Residents who want more info or want to be involved can email info@hintonburg.com. Also, the HCA annual general meeting is this Thursday, where there will be an open forum. Go to hintonburg.com. I will type that email address in the chat momentarily, so if you want it, you'll see that shortly. Okay, the next question, what is the actual height? Why did you not contrast it against the existing plan?
The actual height is 22 meters, 22 stories, which would be, I would say in the range of about 71 meters, 72 meters, something like that. That's at its highest point.
And is there any sort of rendering that shows it against what the secondary plan?
Well, that's a good point. So if we, you know, what I could do, what I haven't done is on building elevations. Under the current plan, you have a 9-story height limit, which would be up to, I don't know, can you see the screen? Yeah. So we're up to this portion here and then stepping down to 6. So, and it's different on the back because, again, that's on the traditional Main Street. On the back side, it's only a 4-story height limit.
Okay, thank you. There is a question that just came in asking, are all the questions text only? So yes, for tonight, if you would like to ask a question, we have the Q&A function. You just input a question there and I will read it out loud. We may have covered this in the beginning, but I'll just go over this again. This is a pre-application meeting. So this is the first touch point with the community in a very long process. And actually, it's not even the first touch point. The community would have had a pre-consultation, I would assume. But it is still part of the initial stages of a long process. We're encouraging you to send feedback to the lead planner and to our office once that has been submitted to DevApps. Once it's on circulation, it's many months of back and forth between the planner, the developer, our office, all sorts of different entities that are involved. And changes could be made, it could get resubmitted, in which case, if there's major changes, we'll do this again. So don't feel like this is your only forum to either voice your opinion or ask a question, because there's going to be lots of opportunity for that in the future. But like I said, this is our first one. So I hope that clarifies that, but if it doesn't, feel free to ask another question and I'll do what I can. Okay, is this rentals or condos?
It is rentals.
Thank you. Will they, the developer, be helping to fund the park redevelopment?
Maureen, did you want to answer that?
Sure, you can do either of us, Rod, I'm fine.
Yeah, so we'll be looking through definitely to be able to fund it. This project will generate a substantial sort of community benefits through Section 37. That'll be directed to the community. We haven't submitted, application hasn't been made, but we're beginning to do calculations. We're not sure of that final number. It's quite a process that goes through back and forth between the city and the developer. But we expect to be able to fund most of that park redevelopment through some of the Section 37 and still have money left over. So, yeah.
just a small clarification. So it won't actually be a municipal park. It's an unopened municipal right of way. There are services underneath it. The city is intending, correct me if I'm wrong, Kirsten, to retain it as a right of way. It would probably be achieved, my guess is, through a series of licensing agreements, and if we were to maintain or do any works there, and then, but the city would own the lands. I don't think Somerset Square is an official park as well.
It is not.
No.
And Miguel, if I can add to, you know, through the pre-consultation and meetings we've been having with the city, we've met with, you know, city representatives from the right-of-way group, from, you know, the program manager from the public realm and urban design group, knowing that this is a key component of development and a very important area of the neighborhood, so that we can start that process right away, you know, working with the city, with servicing in the right-of-way. It can be challenging. So we acknowledge that. We wanted to start that right away. And, you know, right-of-way versus parks. You know, so parks offer green space, but they also offer a lot of limitations for what you can do in a park. So we definitely saw this opportunity, because it is an existing right-of-way, to be able to close it. It does offer more opportunity for use of the area, you know, for example, commercial patios, public events, more readily than a park does. So we definitely see that as an advantage, and we're, you know, continuing to work on that.
Kirsten, I would, so, and sorry, I just want to make sure I've heard you correctly. It would remain city right-of-way.
That's correct.
So I guess the one word that caught my attention was licenses. You know, this would continue to be right-of-way programmed by the city. There wouldn't be any rights over the space or rights of use over the space that would be negotiated, right? This would be city space.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And there's, you know, we don't have the site plan in front of us, but it has been laid out on the site to provide an actual small enough to provide a setback from the property line to provide access into any retail units fronting onto Wellington Street via private property. You know, of course, we would continue to look at that and make sure that you know, there is enough setback. And if not, it would be, you know, looking at pedestrian easements or access from an entry point of view, making sure you can actually open doors. That kind of thing. But yeah, it's not the intention to privatize this space.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that there's no discussion of something like a POPs, but for right-of-way.
No.
Some new concept. Okay.
But, you know, at the same time, commercial tenants tend to animate these, and there could be a lot of great synergies between, you know, like to Rod's point, Susie Q, like it wouldn't be tragic if there was an opportunity for them to spill over into that park. Like one that I really like is the Farm Boy Plaza on Metcalf, right?
Yep.
Where people grab lunch and then spill over into the space, and there's all sorts of synergies that could be had there.
No doubt. But you know, we're seeing what people are doing with street side patios right now, right, in our parking spots and on our sidewalks. But it's still, you know, a very simple. The property line is here, and the city is programming that space, and I would just want to make sure that that's maintained.
You know, I think there's to Miguel's point about the idea when we talk about this thing, the idea of sort of. I think we have to, you know, who we bring in to take a look at this is really important too, and ideas, you know, so that a lot of roundtable discussion, but the idea that you can have dynamic furniture that can move and change from stage set to tables to just benches, you know, but all done in a way that sort of works. I mean, there's a great example. It's a little larger in Detroit, where the 5 streets in downtown Detroit all come together, and they do this whole change throughout the year. I mean, it's quite amazing to see what can be done with some of these small spaces.
And my 2 cents on the topic before we go to the next question is, I think Somerset Square has evolved into a very interesting community gem. Our office has done events there. The HCA has curated the landscaping for many years. The BIA also runs events there. All of those people are on this call today. I think when we do go forward with the parks consultation, rather than creating a space that will be beneficial for the commercial tenants, we should be expanding on all the good parts that are already being used by the community that the commercial spaces can elevate further. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, what are the number of parking spaces provided?
I can look to the site plan. I say the ratio we're doing is essentially 0.6. Up here.
0.5 plus 1 minus.
So we are looking at
There's 154.
yeah, provided 170 we're providing now. So, and I would say because this is a little preliminary, in that range.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not fixed.
Yeah, but in the range of 170, so which is essentially 0.6 of the number of units. So.
Okay, thank you. Will there be affordable housing in this development? And if yes, what definition of affordable housing?
So absolutely. We have not yet defined what our definition of affordable housing is. One of the things that we are committed to is providing the townhouses. And as we said to Councillor Leeper, the 3-bedroom townhouses that are fronting on Armstrong Street, we think are a real attractive element of the project. And that's where we're hoping to put the affordable housing component to be able to attract the families. So I think we're still working through what that looks like, but it is our intent to come up with something attractive on an affordable housing basis.
Thank you. And on that note, what is the setback of the townhouses on Armstrong? For example, how big are the front yards?
Right now they're 4 meters. And then there's an indentation, which is another 2 meters almost. So 4 meters generally as the landscape space. And there's a little patio area that's 2 meters by 3.5 meters. So then there'd be sort of like steps, front steps up from, there'd be a direct sidewalk from the city sidewalk right to a private entranceway in through here into the units. So.
Okay, thank you. The rationale for the height of this building is solely based on the cost that it took to bundle the land? Question?
No. I think that, I think we've gone through both from a planning perspective and an architectural perspective, looking at shifting the density and coming up with the podium elements along the Wellington elevation, as well as the townhouse lower elevation on the Armstrong. We felt that bringing the development up to a tower on top of the podium was the right way to deal with the density we were looking to do on the site. So it wasn't strictly related to what we paid for it. I think that was referring to Rod's comment at the latter point of the presentation, just talking about the last 2 pieces that we picked up were the most expensive, but we felt it was really important to get those pieces because we believe in the entire block as a project. We think that this is really going to create something special in the community.
Thank you. Can Hilda Street be closed at Armstrong and traffic come in via Wellington? Cars keep going north and out onto Armstrong despite a sign saying not to.
Well, maybe Chris can step in and see maybe there's some further road modifications that can help that. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks. I think I do understand that situation does happen, but right, the fact that physically cars can make that maneuver, it's a very short distance. So I think number one, we'll take that back as a comment through the city's records, and we can also talk to the city's area traffic management group as to what might be able to be done there. And if there's an ability to have the access somehow shaped so that we can reduce that risk, then for sure we'll look into those options. So that'll come down the road in the process as we get further into the site plan.
Chris, you might have to turn off your video because you're buffering. Sorry, Fiona.
Well, no worries. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
I just jumped right in there.
Yeah, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay, I'm sorry. So sorry about that. You're right. It did just say that my internet for some reason is weaker right now. So I'm not too sure what you caught there, but to say it succinctly again, it certainly is an enforcement issue, but we'll take the comment back to the city's area traffic management group and see if there's something that, as we deal with the site plan and design of that access, if there's an opportunity for us to do something there that can work to discourage cars from making that movement. Otherwise, it would be a city initiative to look to get that intersection closed.
Thank you. Okay. There was no reference to services to the community other than commercial space. What about a daycare and a medical clinic?
I think that we're very much at the beginning of this process and we're looking at all options. I don't think that we're committed to anything. And when we talk about commercial space, at this point, we're really looking at what we're going to lay out on the ground floor. And this is a block of space attributed to what we hope would be amenable to the community. We have looked at food service, providing food service shopping for the residents in the community. So we've thrown around a lot of ideas. Certainly willing to look at any options. I think that would be great for the community. And I think I also want to add that it is our intention to really bring amenities or services to the building that are commensurate with the existing fabric of Hintonburg. We're not looking to bring in a big bank and slap it in 8,000 feet on the ground floor of this building. As I said, we want to do something special and make it feel part of the community.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question, there's no reference to affordable housing. In the last plan, there was a plan for 2 units, which was too low. Based on this, however, at least there should be 4 units in the new plan. What is your plan to address this need in the community? I believe Maureen already answered that earlier, but if you had any.
There are 9 units at this point. Yes, that is correct.
We have 9 units and they're all 3-bedroom units, or, they're still being designed, but potentially be 3-bedroom units. We'll sort of keep refining these down, but so it'll be 9 units, all in the entire length of Armstrong Street.
Okay, thank you. Can you please clarify where the garage entrance is and how that would flow? If I heard correctly, it was off Garland?
No, the garage entrance is off Hilda Street, and Hilda is a 2-way street from Wellington to Armstrong, and then it's a 1-way in from Armstrong. So people coming to the parking garage would be coming either off Wellington off Wellington, Hilda, and down into the garage, or potentially off Armstrong, turning right and in. Leaving, they would all have to leave and go out onto Wellington Street and cut over to Somerset Street.
Okay, thank you.
We're essentially, I think, lined up our entrance. I'm not sure if we're exactly, but the idea is sort of, I think the other side of Hilda Street is the entrance to the underground parking for.
Yes, ours is very actually close to the surface parking entrance there as well. So it's kind of in between.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is in French, and I don't want to read in French, but I believe it's asking, is the design final?
No, it's a very preliminary. I think from a general massing, the idea that we brought forward with the Armstrong going 3 to 4 stories, and Wellington going 4 to 6 stories, and then Tower. I think that is, the concept is fixed, I would say. I mean, there may be subtle adjustments to it as we move the project forward, but definitely the architecture is at its very early stages.
Do you want me to translate in French or given?
Sure. I just didn't want to butcher it. My French is terrible.
Le placement de la tour, à date, il n'y a aucune application qui ont été déposées, mais l'approche du point de vue design, c'est de mettre la tour au côté est des terrains pour donner une transition aux terrains qui sont à l'est en plus grande proximité du transport en commun. Mais le design est quand même en flux parce que on n'a à date pas déposé d'application, mais ça va être l'approche qu'on va avancer à la ville et on va passer aux prochaines étapes. Mais l'architecture que vous avez vue ce soir n'est pas finale. C'est plutôt le placement de la tour. L'architecture est encore au point de vue concept. That's it.
Merci, Megan.
Yes, thank you. As a local resident, I'm excited that you are seeking to develop this site. There are many positive aspects, but the tower is too tall for the neighborhood. How does 22 stories compare to the apartment buildings that are already close on Wellington and Bayswater? Are there examples of 22-story towers in other residential Main Street areas in Ottawa?
Sorry.
Miguel? Or
Well,
Rod?
I was going to say at Bayswater, the proposed, or Breeze Hill, I think is 27 stories, and I think it's 30 stories on the other side of Breeze Hill, both adjacent to the traditional Main Street.
I'll just add that when the city looks at these, they look both at existing context, which is how tall the buildings are, what's next to it, but then they also have to look at plan function, which is how will the city grow over time based on those policy documents. So that was the end of the presentation, to try to illustrate a little bit how the area will change over time, and the city has, through those other documents, made some decisions that height will accrue and go up as you get closer to that transit station. So the intent of those images is so that everybody kind of understands how it's going to fit into that future context, not just what's there today.
Thank you. Is there any citywide reassessment of densification ongoing with respect to the long-term effects of COVID?
That's a really good question.
I have, yeah, I had a discussion, was it last night's open house? I'm sorry, I've had several of these for the past several nights. And the question does keep coming up. I don't want to spend a long time on the answer, but I think it's important, and it's important that people know where I'm coming from as well. No, the city is not reevaluating its fundamental emphasis on intensification as a key direction for the city moving forward. The city is going to grow. There are going to be, if the population projections hold true, another 400,000 people in the city in another 25 years, that may need to be reevaluated in the light of COVID. But I think we can expect Ottawa as a strong performing economy in the country to continue to grow. And the choice that's before us is still, how are we going to grow? Are we going to grow out, or are we going to intensify? And like most jurisdictions in North America, the choice that this city is recommitting to in the course of developing its new official plan is to intensify, and particularly intensify near transit, because of course shifting transportation mode to electrified transit is a key part of how we're going to address climate change. I think it's really interesting, and Miguel might have seen some of this as well, and I'm sure Rod saw some of it as well. In the first couple of months of the pandemic, there were a bunch of articles that were coming out across North America that said, you know what? COVID is being exacerbated by density, and we need to start looking at allowing a little more urban sprawl, letting the belt out, because people are going to want to move to houses that are further away, since they're not going to have to travel to work anymore. It is healthier, and they'll have more space for a second, for an office space, for example, or more rear yard amenity space. And after a couple of months of that discussion among planners, and you sort of follow along on social media, what I see is the planners have all now come back and doubled down on intensification as the strategy, talking about moving further out and having more space and extra rooms in the house works really, really well for those of us who are pretty well off. I can afford a house probably in the suburbs that would have a home office in it, but that's a huge proportion of Ottawa that will not have that ability. They will never be able to afford a big house in the suburbs on some of the salaries that are being earned today. So we continue to see the need to provide lots and lots more rental housing in the city to address the housing crisis that we have, and we continue to see the need to rein in urban sprawl and shift the mode over to electrified transit in order to address the climate emergency that we have in the city. That's a lot of words. I apologize. I could go on all night about this, but fundamentally, no. The direction of the official plan that we're creating today is still an intensification plan, and whether that intensification is just around transit stations, or whether we are able somehow to successfully start building more intensified suburbs that actually have 15-minute neighborhood kind of features written in, is up in the air. But what is clear is that planners across North America have abandoned sort of an early COVID response that density is bad, and that we in fact need to start loosening the belt on things like urban sprawl in order to address it. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jeff. A clarification from Cheryl with the HCA. Somerset Square is an official park. It was changed to a park a number of years ago. That is true. I just double checked it. It is considered a park for passive recreation. I think the nuanced difference is it's not something that can be booked through allocations. So yeah, thank you.
Fiona, I just want to clarify, like, we've actually met with the Parks Department and they've said otherwise. So I guess this also just shows how important, why we're taking these steps to make sure we do involve the city, because we definitely want to get the correct answer. And so we definitely have two different answers that can, I guess, provide different directions on how this gets managed and developed. So thanks for that comment, and we'll start further into that.
Obviously engage the community and me in that discussion as well.
Oh, yes, of course.
The mystery of Somerset Square. Okay, in the spirit of inclusionary zoning and as a trade-off for extra floors, are you willing to include a percentage of units as affordable housing? Sorry, I didn't read the whole question before I read it out loud. I think that has been answered already. If anyone wants to add anything, otherwise I'll move on.
I think we've answered that, yes.
Thank you. And the next one is also asking about supported housing, which I assume affordable housing. How many commercial spaces? And it is only on, and the commercial spaces are only on Wellington, they're asking.
No, we have commercial spaces right now basically wrapping around onto Garland as well. And we're seeing Hilda Street essentially being made up of lobby area and some of the sort of the back of house that we need for access to, possibly loading, creating areas for garbage to be stored on garbage day. This sort of the back of house stuff will be a little bit more on Hilda Street, as well as our lobby and main entrance. Everything basically from, I don't know if you can see on the screen still, but really from about this exit door right around to this exit door is all potential commercial space.
There's almost
commercial space, not yet defined what that is. So yeah.
There's almost 14,000 square feet of retail. Like a Shoppers is about 9,000. So it's actually a fair amount of commercial space.
Yeah, I would say probably, I think we have too much retail right now. I think
So-
we're targeting around 8,000, I think.
That is correct. Yes, we'd like to have very tight, great retail spaces. The last thing that we would want in the project is retail space that wouldn't be successful. As I said, we're hoping to bring in neighborhood users into the building in the retail elements. So we want to have really great use of the retail space on both Garland and Wellington.
Yeah. So if my screen's up on the ground floor, you'll see an area there saying 13,600 square feet. It's probably a good 5,000 square feet more than what we need. So it's really now about programming and what do we do with the rest. And so how do we, and maybe that sort of more internal storage area, or, so I think maybe it's some communal space, or maybe it's some opportunity for some meeting room space for the community. So we have some ideas. We're just sort of trying to work out how the structure of the building works, and so I think there's lots of potential on this, and it could even be that maybe we add a few more units along Garland Street. But I think the potential is to really have a strong, not too deep, that sort of L-shaped commercial space that would address the two streets.
Thank you. Okay. The developer chose to purchase the last two properties on the block and are now using that to justify the increased height. I understand the developer wants to make money and I'm not against development, but 22 stories is more than 3 times the agreed height in the neighborhood plans. Can you set the building back from Hilda and lower the height?
I would say at this point, we would like to move forward with the plans as submitted. I think we're at the very beginning of a process. And I think we would like to sort of move it forward now, and then see what happens as we move through this. And we're looking at a year-long process, basically. So a lot can happen, and maybe there's other ways that we can offset the perceived adverse impact. And maybe that's through some, as I say, amenity space within the building, or maybe some more affordable units. So I think we would like to move forward with the design and see how we can come up with other ideas to sort of mitigate impact, I think. Is that fair, Maureen?
Yes, I just would like to add that I think that there may have been a misunderstanding in the statement. I think the point that we were trying to make earlier with respect to the acquisition of the last two pieces was talking about they were small relative to the rest of the site, yet we felt that proceeding with picking up those last two pieces was really important to the integrity of the overall development, and being in a position to develop the whole block without leaving two pieces of property on the balance of the site that really were not going to do any benefit to the balance of the development. And we felt that we could better the community area inclusive of the park by having the last two pieces. So by no means were we saying that is what took us to 22 stories. We were saying that, we're hoping that, the fact that we are now at a whole block will give us the opportunity to get the height that we're looking for. And again, balancing that off with how we've dealt with all of the setbacks, the podium, and all of those elements, that is our rationale for moving forward with that density.
And I think we're looking forward to working with staff and getting our technical comments and continuing the design. But I think there is a very good rationale as to why the acquisitions were important, to allow the shift in the tower, and going back to the notion of how this fits into the bigger picture. And what you can do by shifting the tower and protecting the integrity of the main street and setting it back for the 6-story podium and the 4-story podium, because Armstrong House is also an important defining community asset that you want to do a good job and transition well to. And having that entire block and the ability to shift that tower to the east, I think is important from a design perspective. But, you know, we're happy to flush that out with staff and the community and the councillor and everyone else.
And thanks, Miguel. And one of the things that we were trying to do as well, and in listening to the councillor with respect to offloading density off the Garland elevation of the site. So what we did in bringing the tower higher at the most easterly portion of the site, we were then in a position to bring Garland down. So we felt like we were addressing, you know, what is the right thing to do from a lower density perspective on the Garland elevation that pushed the density more to the tower. So we were really trying to balance those two elements.
Thank you. How long would construction be expected to go on?
I think a site like this would be in the range of, I'd say 24 to 28 months, something like that.
Yes, we're looking at 24 with the entire block. It does make it somewhat easier than
24 to 28 is sort of a range. That would be. There's always sort of a few months after people start moving in that construction's still going on, but somewhere in that range.
Thank you. What percentage of apartments are 2 or 3 bedroom? And any discussion on including truly deeply affordable units within the building? So just the first part of the question.
So at this point, we're still working out the unit mix on the building. I think Rod mentioned earlier in the presentation that we're in a bit of a moving target on this. We're looking at what the impact COVID will have. Do we need to make units larger? Should we perhaps have, you know, instead of say 60% of the units being 1 bedroom plus a den, should we have more units that are a little larger? So I'd like to be able to give a definitive answer, but I think it's still really a work in process as we go through this.
Okay, thank you. How many townhouses do you plan to build?
9 at this point, but there could be additional on the Garland elevation.
Okay, perfect. How big is the commercial space? I think I heard that number before, but maybe we can repeat it.
Right now we're showing 13,500. Realistically, it'll probably end up about 8,000 square feet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Why are the townhouses not a mix of affordable and other housing? Seems like unnecessary segregation.
Seems like unnecessary to have them all affordable. Is that the?
Yeah. The goal was
that is our intent, to have them all affordable.
Yeah.
So I think that Teresa can correct me in the Q&A if I'm misunderstanding, but I think the point is by making all of the townhouses affordable, it's segregating them from the rest of the development.
Well, I don't think and I think the councillor can probably speak to this too. I don't think we're talking about that this is, we're talking about social housing now, where we're trying to create affordable units. And there may be a range within these 9 units of affordability. So
yep.
I don't think we're trying to stigmatize in any way. I think what we're trying to do is trying to create a sort of a family-orientated streetscape along Armstrong Street, more so than saying this is where poor people live. That's not our intention.
No.
The intention is really to gear it toward families. And you have to realize that one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of 3-bedroom units, in fact, the only reason you don't see a lot of 3-bedroom units in high-rise construction is it's just so expensive. And so it immediately sort of wipes out the affordability of young families to move into a project like this. And right now, as everybody knows, Hindenburg in this area has become quite trendy and quite expensive. So here's an opportunity to put 9 sort of townhouse units that will hit that affordability target without necessarily, we're definitely not trying to make a social statement. It's more,
no.
It's more of the idea of bringing life to Armstrong. I mean, Armstrong has life now. I'm not saying it's a dead street. It's a very interesting street, But I think we can, with this, it's a unique approach that has been tried in a few places, but I think this, with the opportunity in the green space, makes it a lot greater potential to work.
Okay, thank you. From day one, when the land was acquired, the max possible height was known. We are out of the Preston corridor and we have a true village community feeling at the moment. This 22-story tower is out of context in our neighborhood. Except for the Preston and Trinity towers, none of the buildings are validated, in particular close to the designated BVT area. There are other ways to intensify an area. Why do you have to offer big towers in the middle of an already dense neighborhood?
So I'll just, I'll take a quick stab at it, but the reason I brought up some of the other areas is, much like this site, the Trinity Towers, you know, at Gladstone and Loretta are also on a traditional main street. So is the Icon and some of the heights that we're seeing on Preston Street. And the reason they're interesting sites is because they overlap with both main streets and transit nodes. And the burden that we have is to try to figure out how to do a good job of designing to meet those main street priorities. So the reason it has a neighborhood feel is because of the profiles of the podium, more so, and the experience at the ground level, rather than the height. The height allows us to add density in an area that's in proximity to transit, because we need that to grow. But the discussion we're having tonight is, are we doing a good job at it? Are we putting in a tower that, and I think we are, that has an appropriate podium treatment that respects well what the Wellington Street corridor should feel like, and the Armstrong streetscape in terms of how do we transition appropriately to that heritage building with a 4-story podium in townhouses. So we're actually of the opinion that we're doing all of those things very well. So we actually are preserving that character that people are attached to on Wellington, but we're also doing it in a way that allows us, if we set the tower back and do certain things and shift it to the east, that it also allows us to recognize that these kind of sites are there to meet some of these transit objectives. It requires us to change some of these documents, but I guess what we're asking tonight and to the city is, are we doing a good job at it? That's it.
Okay, thank you. Will you use bird-friendly glazing wherever possible?
I imagine by the time we finish and move the building through the building permit stage, the bird-friendly glazing provisions will be part of the guidelines for all development within the City of Ottawa. City of Toronto implemented these some time ago. City of Ottawa has I think a policy statement out on it. They just haven't implemented it yet. Am I right, Jeff, on that? I think so.
Yeah, we will be implementing them, but I think they're looking at the specifics right now.
Yeah.
You know, certainly in site plan,
yeah.
I'd be pushing hard for friendly. So
yeah. So the answer is yes, and I think the good news is it's going to be yes to everybody. The part I find interesting is they're only targeting high-rise buildings as opposed to all. In my opinion, it should be all housing, all glass, all buildings. So why restrict it to one?
For example, the glass bridges that connect buildings at City Hall would not be subject to this.
Over the Queensway, or
yeah.
yeah. So there's lots of places. Yeah.
Thank you. By developing the whole block, this development enables a better use of the street space to the south. The city won't need to have a road there anymore. What would the city need to do to allow the development to make better use of the street than useless pavement? So I believe we're talking about the expansion of the park, but.
So I think we've touched on it quite a bit. I think there's great opportunity for this, and I think, you know, we almost need like a working group to sort of take this one item and move forward with this through a parallel process. not unlike, I think, what they did down the street at the Mizrahi project. Did they not do a similar process for that little parkette up against Highland Park Drive? Yeah,
It was a city-led parks consultation, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the plan. So this question starts: the plan on the screen does not identify three-bed townhouses as stated in the presentation. Only 1 and 2. Which is it? And then they have a clarification. Maybe I need to look at the first and second floor plans together. So I apologize. I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to make sure I pull up everyone. So these are what you're looking at is the ground floor of two-story units in here, essentially, because the heights of the retail are essentially 2 stories high. So, and you know, we're still working the configuration of where this ramp is and things like that. But the idea, so you know, you basically double these areas. So it says 2-bedroom, but it's really 3 bedrooms. So we're just working this out right now. There may be one sort of 2-bedroom one, but these are all 3-bedroom. This one could be, by the time you double that, you're almost 1,600 square feet. So we have to go through and reconfigure all these spaces, but the idea is that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, sorry, 7 spaces here, not 9, I apologize.
I thought we were going to have 2 potentially on Garland wrapping the corner.
Yes, we had potentially 2 more on Garland. So I think this whole corner just has to be refined a little bit. And these will be 2-story spaces within the 1-story space of this whole floor. Hope that clear. So you'd have essentially 2 bedrooms on the upper floor and a bedroom on the main floor, which is the 3 bedrooms, making up in the range of, by the time you finish, they're going to be like 1,200 square foot units.
Okay, thank you. On that note, there's a question. Maybe they could give a range of prices for the affordable units. That would clear up the confusion.
I think we're still, again, in a very preliminary phase, looking at the sizes of them. And you know, as soon as we have an understanding of the number of total affordable housing units in the project, we're not sure if there's going to be additional ones in the tower at this point. So, you know, as soon as we have that information, we will make it available through the counselor's office.
Okay, thank you. A comment, poor Hilda, in shadow and back of house. Thanks for the comment. And our final question for the moment. We saw the light study. Do you have a similar one for winds, particularly on Somerset Square?
Our wind study is just being finalized now.
So it will be part of our submission that goes to the city when we make the application, and the study will be there, and it's will be open to the public to review.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions in the queue, but I will give a few seconds in case people have any more outstanding questions. Jeff, did you want to maybe start wrap up? Since there's no more questions.
Yes, I would. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. You know, I say the same thing at the end of all these open houses, and I think we have several more to go. It's been very busy with this. The open house is an opportunity to get information from the developer, to ask the questions that give you the information that you need in order to formulate an opinion about whether or not City Council should approve this. Please now start giving thoughts to your position on it. The Hintonburg Community Association has already noted that they will be taking a position on it. And as you know, they are a good, sophisticated group. I would definitely encourage everyone to get involved with them. If you have other questions, by all means, email me, and we'll pass those on to the developer if there's any sort of factual information you need. And otherwise, begin chatting with Simon about where you feel this should or should not be approved. Simon is ultimately going to have to spend the next several months getting the information that Is it Simon? It is Simon. I'm
It
sorry.
is Simon.
Yes.
Sorry, Simon.
To be assigned, Councillor.
To be assigned. Okay. So the planner on the file, hopefully Simon, will have to take a look at this development through the lens of the provincial policy statement, the official plan, the secondary plan, all the various different guidelines that the city has around where tall buildings can be sited and what they have to look like. And then he will make a recommendation to City Council. Once that recommendation is made, he'll make that to the Planning Committee on which I sit. The discussion becomes significantly more political at that point, and don't expect to see a recommendation that is refusal, since if the planner is recommending refusal, generally speaking, the developer will begin to modify their proposal to get them into a point where the planner can recommend an approval. And then that will go to City Council, and it is, of course, appealable to the local planning appeal tribunal. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that everyone has a good night. Simon, thank you very much. Maureen, thank you. Rod, thank you.
Thank you.
Miguel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona, as well, for all of
of course.
your work. Thank
Fiona!
you. Yeah, you should be so lucky.
We've got 3 this week and 3 next week, so it's a fun time over in Kitchissippi.
It is busy.
Well,
thank you very much,
for
everyone.
still being enthusiastic, even though you have so many. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Great evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.